The tunnel opened into a larger room, and in the middle of the room was an old wooden table. On the table, there was a notebook with a black cover. Zara walked up to the table and picked up the notebook. She flipped it open and saw drawings of the same strange symbols they had seen on the walls. There were also lists of names. Zara gasped. What she saw will leave you speechless. When she saw the last two names, Ayo Bakare and Tayo Easy, they were keeping track of the missing students, she said. Whoever is doing this knows about them. Suddenly the scraping sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from a dark corner of the room. Zara shone the flashlight toward the noise, and all three of them gasped. In the corner of the room, they saw something move. It looked like a shadow, but it wasn't just on the wall, it was floating in the air. The shadow had no face, but it seemed to be watching them. Halima grabbed Zara's arm. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. Zara's heart was racing, but she couldn't move. The shadow began to glide toward them, and the air in the room grew colder. Kwame grabbed Zara's hand. "Come on, run!" The three friends ran back through the tunnel, following the chalk marks they had made on the walls. The shadow didn't chase them, but they could still feel its presence, like it was watching them leave. When they finally climbed out of the trapdoor and closed it behind them, they were all out of breath. Halima was shaking. "What was that?" she asked. "I don't know," Zara said, "but I think it has something to do with the disappearances. We're getting closer to the truth." Kwame looked at the notebook Zara had grabbed from the table. "We need to figure out what this means," he said. "But we have to be really careful. That thing in the tunnel, it's dangerous." That night, Zara stayed up late reading the notebook. Most of it didn't make sense. It was full of strange symbols and drawings. But there were also notes written in messy handwriting. Some of the notes talked about the chosen ones and the offering. Zara didn't know what that meant, but it sounded bad. She also noticed that some of the pages had numbers written in the corners. The numbers seemed random at first, but then Zara realized they might be part of a code. She wrote them down in her own notebook and started trying to figure out what they meant. The next day, she showed Kwame and Halima what she had found. Kwame, being good with puzzles, looked at the numbers and nodded. "This could be a code," he said. "Give me some time to work on it." While Kwame worked on the code, Zara and Halima kept researching the history of the school. They discovered that the land Starlight Academy was built on used to belong to a mysterious group called the Circle of Shadows. The group disappeared many years ago, but some people believed they had cursed the land. "Do you think the shadow we saw in the tunnel is connected to the curse?" Halima asked. Zara nodded. "I think so. And I think we need to find out what they're doing with the missing students before it's too late." The next day, Zara, Kwame, and Halima met in the school library during lunch. Kwame had spent hours studying the numbers from the notebook, and he looked excited. "I think I figured it out," Kwame said, holding up a piece of paper with his notes. "The numbers are coordinates, locations on the school map." Zara leaned in closer. "Coordinates? Where do they lead?" Kwame pointed to a map of Starlight Academy that they had borrowed from the library. "Here," he said, circling a spot near the old school auditorium. "It's in the west wing, near the storage rooms." Halima frowned. "That part of the school is always locked. How are we supposed to get in?" Kwame grinned. "Leave that to me." That evening, after most of the students had left for the day, the trio snuck into the west wing. Kwame used his lock-picking kit to open the door to the storage rooms. The hallway beyond was dark and dusty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Zara held a flashlight and led the way. "Stay close," she whispered. "We don't know what's in here." As they moved down the hallway, they noticed strange things. Old paintings with scratched-out faces, broken mirrors leaning against the walls, and a faint humming sound coming from somewhere ahead. Finally, they reached the spot marked on the map. It was another locked door, but this one was different. The door was made of heavy metal, and there were more of those strange symbols carved into it. Kwame started working on the lock while Halima and Zara kept watch. After a few minutes, the lock clicked, and the door swung open. Inside was a large room filled with strange objects. Candles, jars of black powder, and more notebooks like the one Zara had found. But the thing that caught their attention was a large circle drawn on the floor, made of white chalk. In the center of the circle was a small statue of a shadowy figure. "What is this place?" Halima asked, her voice trembling. "I think this is where they do—" "Whatever they're doing to the students," Zara said. "But why?" As they examined the room, Zara noticed something written on the wall above the circle. It was a symbol they hadn't seen before, a large spiral with sharp lines cutting through it. Next to the symbol were words written in an old, faded language. "We need to figure out what this says," Zara said, taking a picture with her phone. Kwame picked up one of the notebooks and flipped through it. "These notes are written in the same language," he said, "but some parts are in English. Listen to this. 'The chosen ones will give their light to awaken the shadow.'" Halima's eyes widened. "What does that mean? Are they taking something from the students?" Zara nodded. "I think they're taking more than that. They might be using the students to feed whatever this shadow thing is." Just then they heard a sound behind them, a low, deep rumble, like the growl of an animal. The air in the room grew colder, and the candles on the table flickered. "We need to get out of here," Halima said. But before they could run, the door slammed shut behind them. The room plunged into darkness. Zara gripped the flashlight and shone it around, her heart pounding. The growling noise grew louder, and a shadow began to form in the center of the circle on the floor. Kwame grabbed Zara's arm. "What is that?" "I think it's the same thing we saw in the tunnel," Zara said. "But it's stronger now." The shadow rose higher, its shape shifting like smoke. It had no face, but Zara could feel it staring at them. The room grew colder, and it felt like the shadow was pulling the air out of their lungs. Halima screamed, "What do we do?" Zara looked around and saw a jar of the black powder on the table. She grabbed it and threw it at the shadow. The powder exploded into a cloud, and for a moment the shadow flickered and shrank. "That worked!" Kwame shouted. "Do it again." They grabbed more jars and threw them at the shadow. Each time the shadow flickered, and the air grew warmer. Finally, with a loud, echoing roar, the shadow disappeared. The room went silent, and the door creaked open. The three friends stood there, shaking but alive. After escaping the room, Zara, Kwame, and Halima ran to Zara's house to talk about what had happened. They knew they had to keep going, but they also knew it was getting more dangerous. Zara spread out the photos she had taken of the symbol and the writing on the wall. "We need to figure out what this means," she said. "It might tell us how to stop the shadow for good." Kwame nodded. "I can look up the symbols online. Maybe I can find a translation." Halima sighed. "I just want this to be over." "Why can't the teachers or the police do something?" "Because they're hiding something," Zara said. "The teachers know more than they're saying. And I think the shadow is controlling them too." The trio agreed to meet again the next day to continue their search. But as Zara lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the shadow. She knew it wasn't just about the missing students anymore. If they didn't stop it, the shadow might take over the whole school, or worse, the whole city. The next morning, Zara, Kwame, and Halima met in the library before school started. Kwame had spent all night researching the strange symbol they found on the wall. "I found something," he said, spreading out a stack of printed papers. "The symbol belongs to an old group called the Children of the Shadow. They believed in using something called soul light to make their shadow god stronger." Halima shivered. "Soul light? What's that?" Kwame pointed to one of the papers. "It's the energy that makes people who they are, their creativity, intelligence, or courage. The Children of the Shadow thought they could take that light from people and offer it to their shadow god." Zara frowned. "So that's why the missing students were all talented. Ayo was a great athlete and Tayo was a genius. They were offering their light to the shadow." Halima's eyes widened. "If they're taking the best students, does that mean one of us could be next?" Zara nodded. "That's why we have to stop this. We need to find out who's controlling the shadow." Later that day, Zara noticed something strange. While getting dressed after gym class, she saw a faint spiral-shaped mark on her arm. It was barely visible, but when she touched it, it felt warm, like it was glowing. She showed it to Kwame and Halima during lunch. "I don't remember getting this," Zara said. "What do you think it means?" Kwame studied the mark. "It looks like the same spiral symbol from the shadow room." Halima gasped. If you enjoy this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe to be notified for the next part. Thank you.